everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 4 of TRIGUN STAMPEDE. I'm pretty excited, because last episode was amazing. just the darkest thing, and I was like, okay, I can handle dark. I can handle dark. All right, Vash getting serious, getting some darkness, and knives being a legitimate threat. I am here for this. Let's go. So yeah, why not? I'm really excited to see what's gets brought up in this episode. I've got a couple comments I want to go through before we start this. We've had a lot of comments for episode 1 over on YouTube, specifically talking about the animation and everything like that. Again, we have a spoiler corner where I'm going to talk about the OG stuff since I've watched the OG Trigun first. But so far, episode 3 like changed the game. I was like, episodes 1 and 2, I was like, all right, this is fine. It's not the original, but it's okay. And then episode 3, I was like, okay, it is not the original, and I'm intrigued. So I feel like if you can make it, if you're an OG Trigun fan and you can make it to episode 3, give episode 3 a shot, and you're like, okay, I want to see what you're going to lay down because you got me. You got me, gal. Now I want to know. So I'm excited to see what happens. We haven't seen Wolfwood yet. No signs of other certain characters, but we did meet the Nebraska family, which that dynamic did not go exactly like it did in the original. Just FYI. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen from here. What we're going to get. There's a lot of mystery, a lot of things that I'm like, okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. I feel like Grease. Tell me more. Tell me more. Is Knives going to play the piano the entire time? Probably. I'm here for it. He's a good piano player. I'd tip him. So the comments I have, I Swallow Apple Seeds had a really, really cool comment because I've watched TRIGUN Stampede, or I've watched Badlands Rumble. I'm watching TRIGUN Stampede, but I watched Badlands Rumble, the movie, and apparently Studio Orange that produces TRIGUN Stampede, that's an affinity of Madhouse, was also did the CGI for Badlands Rumble, because Badlands Rumble, the movie that I reacted to, was done by Madhouse, and Studio Orange is an affiliate with them. They did the CGI for it, and now they're doing this. And I'm like, wow, that is very intriguing. Someone was also saying, I don't have this in my comments, but somebody was also saying that the CGI done for TRIGUN Stampede and Studio Orange does the CGI work for the rebuilds for Neon Genesis. And I'm like, aha, that explains a lot. I can see that quite easily. So cool. Nice. And then Limonitsu said that Vash's original VA was actually in episode 1. They were the radio announcer. I was like, his original VA. I'm a little sad that Vash's VA isn't reprising the role, but you know, here's the thing. It's hard when 20 years have passed and you're a voice actor, your voice tends to age. I think the biggest, most egregious example is when like James Earl Jones does the Star Wars trilogies from like 30 years later, and he's trying to sound like young Vader, and he's like sounding 80, like he's 80, like he actually is. And you're like, wow, his voice sounds older, because it is, right? And so I do applaud that the Japanese cast were like, you know, the original Vash, it's been 20 years. Maybe we'll get a new voice actor. It's fine. And the new voice actor does a really good job with Vash. I like him. But in that same vein, Johnny Young Bosch does the voice of the original English dub of Trigun, which a young Johnny Young Bosch, I feel like his voice wasn't quite as distinct. When I think of Johnny Young Bosch, I think of Ichigo from Bleach. Like, that is his iconic role in the English dub. He voiced Ichigo for so many episodes, and his voice as Ichigo is ingrained in my brain that when I hear him in anything modern, I kind of like, there are some modern examples, like he plays a character in Demon Slayer that I wouldn't recognize him as. I'm like, oh, okay. He kind of has modified his voice as he's gotten older, I think, to try to get away from sounding like Ichigo. Don't blame him. You don't want to be typecast. But when he was Vash in the original, he didn't quite sound like Ichigo because it was one of his earlier roles. So that's cool. But he's playing Vash in Stampede in the English dub, which I've not listened to yet. But now I'm like, oh, because I've not watched the new Bleach yet. Only because I'm waiting to react to it on this channel, hopefully next year, if I can play my cards right. But I have seen a clip where the original voice actor of Ichigo in the Japanese sub and Johnny Young Bosch got together, and Johnny Young Bosch sounds so much older, but he's trying to play a high school kid. I'm like, oh my god, it's like never been kissed. So, you know what? Kudos for getting Johnny Young Bosch to play Vash in all of the versions of the English dub. Good for them. But I do like the fact that they did get a new voice actor for the Japanese sub because, yeah, voices change. You get older. You don't want to necessarily play a character you played 20 years ago. Understandable. Seems legit. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. So I really liked those comments. I'm glad y'all made note of them. Good. That's really exciting. But I want to give a special shout out over to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon to thank them for their support in these videos, to help me to not only be able to watch these anime and manga and talk to you all about them, but to be able to afford all the little things that go with setting all of this up. So I really, really appreciate it. So a special thanks to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Anna, to Ashley Got No Bitches, to Be Happy, to Dana, to Destiny Marie, to Eric, to Edgar, to Kiri, to Loisiji, to Matthew Palfiniere, to Nameless Monster, to Saku, to Shimoyama, to Sunspots, to Trails, Translucent Min, Tyrone, and Zachiel. Thank you all so much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. Thank you. So yeah, I'm super excited now. I'm like, I'm geared up. I was happy for Trigun Stampede, and the first couple episodes I was like, okay, I'll watch the next episode. But now I'm like, oh no, I want to watch the next episode like right now. So that's where we're at, right? So I'm excited. I hope you all are too. But we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive right in and see what we get. So we're going to start Trigun Stampede episode 4. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. It's Hosoya. Okay, I'm perfectly fine with it being Hosoya. I was like, the way that they said Boki and stuff, I was like, it sounds kind of like Suabe, but then I was like, there was like moments when he get like this raspy growl, and I was like, is that Reiner? Fangirling! I love Soya. Soya is one of my favorites. I love Soya. They are Sosuke. They are Reiner. They are all the great characters that you could possibly love. Suabe is very sensual, very good. I feel like when Suabe and Soya like get kind of that sensually growly voice, they do sound kind of similar. But Suabe has like more of a purr. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop fangirling. Stop it. But Hosoya being Wolfwood, yes, please. Yes to all of these things. Hosoya's voice actor in the OG series for Wolfwood is the same voice actor as Aizen for Bleach. So you can fangirl over that, but Hosoya! So excited to have Soya on. Yes, please. Awesome. And Hosoya can play like a kind of like playful but broody angst, which I think that Wolfwood has the capabilities of doing based on this episode. So I'm really excited to see what Hosoya will do in the role of Wolfwood. Now, I've got a spoiler corner where we'll talk about OG things. Obviously, this episode was pretty darn good. This episode was really good. I love that we bookend with these random hikers in the desert. They're just like, these guys, they're just like killing worms and eating them, just scavenging through the deserts. They're not like bandits or anything. They're just like, hey, let's chill out. And we're just scouring the desert for things, right? I think that's pretty fun. I think it's pretty cool. I also like the fact they say they want to try plant-based food. So that sets up some world-building things. One, it sets up the idea that the plants are a source of food for the wealthy. So that's saying something. There is a note of that. I could see why Knives would maybe be upset if the brethren, potentially, that they are, or whatever they're stealing, is being used for food by the humans. I can see why they would be upset with that, because we established in this that Knives and Vash are kind of like alien beings, and they're connected to the plants. And so if that's being eaten by humans, I can see why Knives would be somewhat problematic about that. So, I like that. That adds a little bit of stake there. It adds a little bit of reasoning to Knives not liking the humans. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. But yeah. So then Wolfwood shows up. Oh my god, with his like shirt unbuttoned and like untucked, and he's got like a blazer that doesn't look like it fits. I don't know. It's Japanese fashion where the men's pants are too short. They're like showing their ankles. We call them floodwaters here in this part of the American woods. When they're too short, we call them floodwaters. I don't know. Aesthetically, it's not my thing, but I'm not a guy and I don't know Japanese fashion, so whatever. But I just like that he just shows him. He's like, oh my gosh. Which now we know that seems to be a tactic that he uses to potentially like bait people to be taken in by Zazie. So that's rather interesting, right? I like the idea that we cut from the last episode where Vash like took off by himself and we were like, oh no, what's gonna happen with Meryl and Roberto? And Meryl and Roberto are driving him around and he's sleeping in the back seat. Love it. Now, again, we have all of the cigarettes in the little ashtray that Roberto has been smoking. And Meryl's like, how in the world can this guy sleep? I do like now that we know that the OG Vash, their voice is the voice of the radio announcer. And when you hear him talking about the military police looking for Meryl and Roberto, you can kind of, if you listen closely, you can hear the cadence. It kind of sounds like Vash, but his voice sounds a lot older. So I could see why he doesn't play Vash anymore. I could see that. But so yeah, basically Meryl and Roberto have been identified as accomplices to Vash. And the police are after them. Luckily, they don't know their identities. I think it's important that Roberto notes that if they are found out, they are going to be arrested and they're going to also be fired from their jobs. So fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough there. But yeah, and then Meryl, she talks about wanting to eat something and he's like, look, here's the sandwich. And Meryl's like, well, we got that yesterday for Vash, but Vash isn't eating it. I liked the bookend thing of, we started out the episode where Meryl was kind of worried about Vash because he wasn't eating, meaning that he was like kind of starving himself. He was depressed, not feeling good. And by the end, he takes the big old chunk of worm ribs and like gets a bite off of it. And she's like, okay, so that means that Vash is feeling better. Good. So yeah, I like that. That made me feel really good to know that kind of world building, that Vash is seemingly like in a better position. And then we have the thing about the worms. Now, what's kind of cool and I like about the world building is the worms start out as like little spores. They start out as like these little spore amoeba creatures and then they keep growing and clumping together and then they like kind of evolve and become, they like go through a Pokemon evolution and eventually become the grand worm. So like just grow and develop. It's really creepy, but people eat them all the time for food. And I think that's a nice tie to ecologically how a lot of countries are eating bugs now. Like bugs are a big source of protein for countries. And I watch baking shows and they've made like flour out of crickets and stuff. And that's like ecologically like where we're going. And I'm kind of like Meryl where I don't want to eat bugs. And I'm like, ew, no, like worms gross me out. And I'm like, no, I don't like the idea of parasites and worms and stuff inside of me. No. So I'm with Meryl. But I mean, it is ecologically talking about something that could very well happen in our world. But damn, she like just the way that she nearly hits Wolfwood and Roberto's like, oh God, no, and it just slams him with their little trailer that they're dragging. Hilarious. And of course, Wolfwood is just completely knocked out. Notice his glasses were unfazed. I was like, was that even real blood? And then the bandits or the guys that are hunting worms are just like, they're not even bandits. They're like, oh my God. And she's like, you're not dying on me. And then Wolf was just in the back seat sloshing around. I love Vash's expression while Wolfwood's sloshing around. He's like, what do we do about him? He's like, I don't want this guy to die on me. And I love, of course, the color dynamic. You have Wolfwood in the very drab gray outfit, whatever. And then you have Vash in the bright colors, the bright hair. Like the contrast is just absolutely wonderful. So we stop out at this plant gas station, this plant thing, which now that we know that Zazie and Wolfwood are working together, it makes sense that Wolfwood staked outside of the plant thing to lure in people to possibly like pawn or rob or whatever. And Zazie posed at the gas station as the poor kid that was like trapped inside while the bandits killed his parents, when that wasn't the case at all. Instead, it was Zazie that killed them. Right? And it seemed kind of fresh, right? Which makes you wonder if like the woman and man, they'd been instantly killed and the bandits hadn't gotten away. But the thing that's kind of weird about it is that it doesn't look like anything was taken. So that should have been a red flag that like nothing looked like it was stolen. So like, why would these people randomly get killed? And then the kid was spared, but the people didn't pilfer around and try to take anything, right? So in hindsight, it seems like it should have been a red flag, but the kid also has, hair that kind of looks like the man that was killed. And then sure enough, Vash goes in and volunteers to look. and sees the little kid. So Roberto and them are fueling up the tankard, and Roberto seems highly suspicious of Wolfwood, as he should be, apparently. And then, God, now that we know that Zazie and Wolfwood are working together, it makes this whole funeral scene seem so ridiculous. Like, Zazie's trying to hold back a laugh because of how bad Wolfwood is at being a priest. And he says, I'm not a priest, I'm an undertaker. Which is nice, right? Interesting. And Meryl's like, what the fudge? Like, Meryl and Vash both look like, this is so awkward. What do we do? Like, I like they both look at each other like, what do we do in this situation? Everything is just completely ridiculous. And Meryl, I like Meryl and Wolfwood's dynamic where Meryl's just like constantly questioning him and just like poking and prodding, and Wolfwood pokes and prods right back. Like, he almost flirts with her. And I'm like, whoa, get out of my Vash and Meryl ship. No, sir. Although, I will, this isn't really a spoiler, but in the OG series, I hardcore shipped both Meryl and Vash and Wolfwood and Vash. And in this episode, when Vash is like, hello, best buddy, it gave me very Dragon Ball Z abridged Goku and Vegeta vibes. For Vash is like, Goku, like, come on, best buddy. And Wolfwood's like, I'm not your best buddy. But he's going to become, I'm sure, his best friend by the end of this. Because that's just how Vash works. He lures you in, and suddenly he lures you in, and then just like... Also, at first, I felt really bad when Wolfwood, like, he brings out the lollipop and then he's, like, going to give it to Zazie and puts it in his mouth instead. But now that we know what we know, it's just like, come on. He's like, oh, you're hungry, right? Here, have a lollipop. And it's like, ugh. And then he talks about, I lost my parents too, and I grew up in an orphanage. And then he gives him, he's like, it's good, right? And he nods and he's like, yeah, no matter how heavy a cross you carry, you still deserve to eat and you deserve to laugh. Which hits really hard because Vash takes those words to heart. And at the end of this episode, he sits down and says, well, I still deserve to eat and to laugh, don't I? Like, Vash is getting sucked into the Wolfwood. And I mean that in the most non-sexual way possible. But Wolfwood's, he doesn't know that Wolfwood is suspect. Roberto's suspect. Roberto's like, yeah, this seems a bit... I like Zazie's nails. Also, that should have been like a giveaway. The nails were kind of done. And like the like ornate decor of their fashion is so fascinating. I love when they did the little bug mask. It felt like Majora's Mask from Zelda. I was like, what is this? The design's just really freaking cool. And so they gives him their charges. His invoice of $20,000. And he's like, well, you should have asked my rates before asking me to do my work, dummies. And then I like that Roberto's not even, like, phased. He's like, weren't you hit by a car? You look like you're fine, though. Roberto's interesting because Roberto is highly suspect, highly suspicious, highly not trusting of Wolfwood, as he should be. And meanwhile, Meryl's like, I don't really know how to read this guy, but I'm a reporter, gotta get the scoop, gotta get the evidence. And Vash is like, best friends. Everything's fine. What does Vash have to worry about? Honestly, though, it's just, weird coincidence they get sucked up by the worm as they all, as they just arrive at the station and all of this. And of course, Meryl grabs a hold of Zazie to, like, save him from the fall and all of this. They're lucky they didn't get smashed by the cars, that was falling down, right? So meanwhile, what's interesting is that Wolfwood sees Vash save Meryl and Zazie from the falling debris. And Wolfwood just kind of gives him a look like, who are you? Like, what's going on? What's curious is Wolfwood made no attempt to save Zazie as they fell. Probably because he knew that Zazie had everything under control and he wasn't going to be hurt. But I think Wolfwood is intrigued by the fact that Vash is so self-sacrificing. And he doesn't understand why Vash is self-sacrificing, but he's very intrigued by it. He's like, what is your deal? Why are you self-sacrificing? What are you doing? And that look by Roberto's just like, don't trust him at all. Roberto, like, understands that there's stuff going on. And then we have the idea of the worms. So the worms are all interconnected. They all telepathically communicate against one another. Isn't that fun? Not disgusting at all. And they have this electronic network. Roberto just knows everything, right? And then, yeah, ugh. And what do they say? What did he say there? meaning he's the boss around here. The big worm is the boss. And so then Meryl and them were like, oh, wait, kid, hold on. The moment that Zazzy started to take off on his own and start climbing over things, I'm like, that's a bit suspicious. That's a bit weird. Like, kid, if I was a child and terrified, I would not take off on my own. I would wait to see what these adults seem to maybe know what they're doing are going to do. But no, he takes off. And then the moment where he was like lying on the ground and luring Meryl in, I was like, that was suspicious too, but didn't want to say anything. I was like, we'll just let this play out. I'm like, I think I know who this is, but, and I'll talk in the spoiler corner about it more, but just know Zazzy does exist in the OG. That's all you need to know. So yeah, and he's like, it's a tool of my trade. He's like, how would I make a living if I didn't have it? Right? And then we find out it's a giant ass gun, right? He just carries around this gun, which makes him a rather interesting person to have along with you. It's like, oh, we have a hired gun. Are they working for us or against us? I will officially call Roberto Uncle Downer from here on in. Uncle Downer is freaking hilarious. I love that Roberto and Wolfwood clash instantly. They're like, nope. And then, of course, Meryl gets lured in by Zazzy and gets taken. And what's interesting is Roberto immediately suspects Wolfwood that this is all too coincidental and that Wolfwood's behind it, which, surprise, he is. He's working with Zazzy. So Roberto knows what's up. He just doesn't have ways to confirm it yet, right? So I have a feeling he's going to be on Wolfwood's case quite a lot. Yeah. And then that's when Wolfwood questions Vash. He's like, you'd risk your life for theirs. Why? He's like, self-sacrifice on self-sacrifice. You're a weird one. And Vash, the last couple of episodes have brought up this idea that Vash, you're self-sacrificing for all these people. Why? What's in it for you? And Vash has kind of had to do a little bit of soul searching to kind of answer that question. And he grabs the one worm and eats its head off, which is gross. And he eats the worm whole, actually, and spits out the thing. And he goes, you only get one life. So you have to fight for it no matter who you hurt in the process. And he throws the worm. He's like, there's no other way to survive. Him and Aaron would be great friends. From Attack on Titan, right? They'd be great friends. But yeah, Wolf was just like, I'm going to try to survive as much as I can, which means that I'm going to do whatever I can, and whoever I have to roll through to get to, survive, I'll do it. And that's definitely not Vash's MO. Vash is like, I don't get that. Meanwhile, Roberto says they take the first bite to get your guard down and lace what they pass on their target, then lace what they pass to their target with poison. So he's like, watch out for this guy. He's probably going to poison you. Standard stuff for assassins. He's like, our agency isn't much to be proud of, but one thing we do have is a good intel network. And I've heard about humans who control worms. So Roberto kind of throws his hand being like, I think it's you controlling these worms. And I think that you're the one we don't need to be trusting. And he's half right. Roberto's not controlling the worm, or Wolfwood's not controlling the worms. But he's like, definitely not somebody to be trusted at this point. Right? And so Roberto keeps trying to see what the gun is. And then Vash is like, oh, don't worry. He's going to show us. He'll be fine. He'll show us what the gun is eventually. We're all good. And Roberto's like, well, why do you have all this faith in them? And he's like, no, I can see it in his eyes that he's fine. Best friends. Besties. Love it. And the way that Wolfwood kind of like goes, are you trying to have a shippable moment with me? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Vash is trying to have a shippable moment with you, and you should just let your guard down, because Vash is like he's gonna worm his way into your heart. I am sure. That look on Wolfwood's face when Vash said that was just like, oh, you're done. There's no hope for you. I'm here for it. I'm ready to watch the fall. I'm ready to be beholden upon it. It's going to be great. Because then he's like, you really mess with me. I'm like, oh, and the fact that it's Hosoya, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to see what rowdy adventures these two get into. There's so much potential. You all have no idea how excited I am. You really don't. But yeah. And so, yeah, I like that I keep wanting to call him Hosoya now. I like that Wolfwood is saying, oh, well, they've already been digested by the worms, so let's just go. So clearly this would lead us to believe that they're wanting to try to isolate Vash, are Zazzy and Wolfwood working for knives? It would seem that this would maybe be a good connection to that. I don't know. But they seem to want to isolate Vash and take him away. The worm spits them out. So like trying to get Vash by himself so that maybe Zazzy and Wolfwood can take him on 2-on-1. That we don't know. But they do get spit out of the worm. And then as it's coming back, Vash is like, I'm going back to get them. And Wolfwood's like, are you crazy? We just got out. Are we going to throw that away? And Vash is like, they're my friends. I'm going to go back and get them. And thus they go. So yeah, but then you see Zazzy like go in and hug Vash. Like, what did he do in that moment? I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? And that's when Vash is like, oh, he hears the frequency. And he's like, oh, a little too careless, aren't we? How many times have you let me out of your sight? And Vash, you can tell he's thinking about Zazzy at that moment. And he's like, well, you didn't shoot me, so why should I not trust you? But that's when he like pushes Zazzy away and he's like, the mosquito sound. You're the one controlling the worms. And I love that Zazzy's like, oh, well, normal humans can't hear that. But yeah, it's his eye. I love their character design. They look so great. And they instantly, like, everything turns red. It's so freaking cool. And then, yeah, all the worms start secreting stuff. It should have also been apparent that Wolfwood was working with Zazzy when he was doing all the tricks with the gun, right? Because Wolfwood, by nature, from what we've seen so far of him, seems very much like a instant action, act now, talk later kind of character that's like, no, I'm going to pull out the gun, get rid of the target, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. But here he was doing like the fancy, like spinning the gun around and making it look all cool and look all, you know, very just showing off. And now we know, well, yeah, because he wasn't actually killing Zazzy. It just made it look like that. So I just, the way they animate Wolfwood, I'm going to be a very happy Romania Black. I do like the giant worm like coming out, the worm coming out of the sand, and we have just the humor of those three guys in the desert being like, huh. And then the worm just gets completely obliterated and they're like, we've got enough food for months. How are we gonna keep this? This is like Oregon Trail. We got enough salt to keep this worm food. Do we really? And he's like, I'm just an undertaker. And that's when Zazzy's like, okay, seeing you, that's assuming you get out of here alive. I love their voice actor. It's amazing. And then just, yeah, the little flying mask. Amazing. They look like something from Majora's Mask from Legend of Zelda. Just love it. And so then, yeah, I just love the guys are like, oh my God, worm food. And then Meryl's like, I don't want to eat it. And Wolfwood is definitely just teasing her over and over again. And so Roberto tries to warn Vash. He's like, hey, that machine gun is a cross. That cross is a machine gun. Like, we should be a little bit wary of him because he's got this giant gun. Don't you think it's a little bit suspicious? And Vash is like, well, but we made it through thanks to him. And I like that Roberto says you'd think a villain for his vagaries. And Vash is like, yeah. He's like, I'm kind of generous like that. I get that a lot. And that's when he joins the fire. Like, Vash doesn't seem too worried. I feel like Vash feels he's seen into Wolfwood's soul. And despite him working for Zazzy, whether Vash realizes it or not, he's like, I know in the end he's not going to be a threat. So we think. And then, yeah. And then I like that Roberto's like, you need to fix that problem you've got. And Vash is like, nope, not listening. And so he sits down and eats the worm meat. Like, and of course that makes Meryl excited because he's eating something again. And then Wolfwood is like, you took my words to heart, huh? All right. And he kind of like, the smile he makes is kind of like, it's almost like a forced smile, like, I'm Nicholas D. Wolfwood. He has the power of D. He has the will of D. Nicholas does. Yes. And Vash is like, I am Vash the Stampede. And he calls him Needle Noggin instead. I like that. I like that he calls him Needle Noggin, right? Not a spoiler, really, but in the OG series, Wolfwood calls Vash Needle Noggin. So I'm like, the continuity is very fun. Not lost on me. But yeah, those two teaming up, and then Wolfwood flirting with Meryl, and she's like, say something, Roberto. And Roberto's like, hey, Roberto's kind of eased off now, because I feel like Roberto, as a journalist, at first he was very hot and heavy onto Wolfwood because he suspected him, right? And he still suspects him. And he's tried to convince Vash to be like, hey, don't you think this is a problem? And Vash is like, we're fine. So I feel like at this point, Roberto's like, well, if Vash isn't worried and I can't convince him to be worried, I don't want to drag Meryl any deeper in this than I can. So I'm just going to lay off. I'm going to ease up on the gas, and I'm going to let this coast and see what happens. And so now he's like backing off, being like, no, it's fine if he comes with us. We clearly can't get rid of him, so it's all good. And then Vash is like, aren't we all just the bestest of friends? He's like, look at the sky. Isn't that great? And yeah, and then of course, Roberto ruins the mood by saying they're all worms. So then we cut to an undisclosed location where Wolfwood has already smoked 8 cigarettes. And he's on his 9th. Like, how he's been able to chain smoke like this is amazing. But he's sitting outside of something, and then there's Zazie covered by the worms. You overdid it and almost got me killed too. Or he says that. And Zazie's like, well, Zazie the beast. But you earned their trust, didn't you? Besides, killing friends is your favorite. You honestly couldn't care less about human lives, could you? And he's just like looking, he's like, I can see it in your eyes. He's like, I don't care. I just do my job. No matter who I'm up against. So he's been hired by somebody, and Zazie's calling him out, saying like, you're an assassin and you kill a lot of people, don't you? And he's like, I just do my job. But then we cut back to Vash, who's asleep. What Vash the Stampede... So then we get to this, the lab, and I think it's the doctor talking that says what Vash the Stampede manifested in that moment must be the gate that allows access to the higher dimension. Whatever that entails. A higher dimension, a gate. We talked about gates in the last episode, that Knives is all about Vash opening this gate. And meanwhile, they have all these light bulbs that are red. So are they taking the red plants and making bulbs out of them? What? And he says, but it's still locked. His morality and ethics are functioning as a defense mechanism. So yeah, it showed them taking, inside the bulbs are there's the red plants, right? Inside the bulbs. Okay. So Vash has a gate that's unopened, but him acting like a human is keeping it from being unlocked. Meanwhile, we see all of these red bulbs, the creepy little girl, and then the doctor. He's like, your little brother is more human than anyone. And which is true. And Knives just laughs at that. And he's like, well, then we'll just have to pry it open. And it just shows him like with the Wolverine claws or like the Shredder claws. Creepy. We'll destroy him if we have to. So whatever gate that Vash can unlock is what they're after. And Knives seems fully ready to use his brother and potentially kill him to get it to open. So... that's fun. I really loved this episode a lot. I'm digging Stampede. I really am. I've got just a few teensy spoilers that I want to talk about in Spoiler Corner, but overall, pretty solid episode. I'm glad Wolfwood's here. Wolfwood's one of my favorite characters, so far I have not been let down by his character. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see where that goes. So, in the meantime, if you're not sticking around for the Spoiler Corner, I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back next week with episode 5 of Trigun. Vash the Stampede, but also Trigun Stampede. Man. I'm so glad Wolfwood's here. So glad Wolfwood is here. Very glad that Wolfwood is here. Also, Zazie was like, there were like sirens going off, and I was like, I can't say that it's Zazie, but it's Zazie. Like the moment when we opened up the locker, I really couldn't tell it was Zazie at first. I remembered the worm episode because that's when Zazie was introduced, but it's way down the line. Like Zazie getting introduced into this series in the OG series is like at the halfway point or near it. it's not in the 4th episode for sure. So his storyline comes way down the line. So at first I wasn't even thinking about Zazie. And then when the worms swallowed them, I was like, this seems kind of like the worm episode in the OG series. And it had a kid that turned out to be Zazie the Beast. And the moment he took off on his own, I was like, oh my God, it's Zazie. I was like, oh shit. Although, love Zazie's design. Love kind of like the Majora's Mask, like tribal. I love that look on them. The look that they have when they're in child form, like posing, that looks like the look they have in the actual OG episode. But I like this like tribal look. It's very cool. And the way that they like interact with the worms is interesting. I really do appreciate that we get more of Zazie interacting with the worms, because in the OG series, the surprise is figuring out who Zazie is. And so because of that, you don't get a lot of that interaction because it's meant to be like not revealed until the very end. But here, and in the OG series, it's revealed the same way that Vash kind of finds out in this version. But I like that throughout this, once here's the big difference, and I was trying not to say it in the reaction, so I'm like, ugh. The big difference is, in the OG series, we see Zazie introduced like for a hot second at the beginning when the Gung Ho Gang is first introduced. We see Zazie among them, and then he's not brought up again for like several episodes until we get to the worm episode, which is towards near the climax arc of the series. And so you don't really get to hear about Zazie again until he's brought up when the worm episode happens. And by that point, Vash has kind of been tested, his limits, and Vash has been constantly going around and around in circles with Wolfwood about humanity and about the killing versus not killing argument when you're threatened. And so in the OG series, whenever Zazie finally is revealed and confronts Vash, Zazie makes a move that would harm Meryl and the others, and Wolfwood kills him. Wolfwood straight up shoots him and kills him. And that causes a big rift between Vash and him, because Vash is like, why'd you take a life? And Wolfwood's like, because he was going to kill us. So I find it very interesting that in this version, Zazie and Wolfwood are very closely working together. Because it was kind of hinted at throughout the OG series. You get the idea that Wolfwood is involved with the Gung Ho Gang. He's possibly a member of the Gung Ho Gang and a hired gun. So you've kind of had the suspicion that Wolfwood and Zazie have been working for the same organization, but not really working together. So the idea that they're working together here is very intriguing. And so I'm wondering if at some point Wolfwood is going to kill Zazie so that it doesn't get revealed that he's been working for who I think he's working for Knives. Right, because we haven't seen Legato in this world yet. So I think he's working directly for Knives. And I wondered last episode if the doctor was Chapel. I think he might be. I could be wrong, but it would make sense if he's Chapel and Wolfwood's working for Knives because of Chapel. That would all make sense. So I'm very curious to see if Wolfwood is going to end up killing Zazie, or if Zazie's going to out Wolfwood as the traitor to Vash and it cause like a whole big thing. I'm very curious to see how that would go. But the worms got an upgrade. So glad the worms got an upgrade. Good deal. Also, Wolfwood and Vash's dynamic. Oh my God. Love the idea. In the OG series, Wolfwood and Vash are both like, they both have very similar personalities. It's just that their ideologies are different. And that's really the grind between the two. Here, their personalities are actually different, which I kind of like. I like their personalities are kind of oil and watery. But Vash is just like, puts on the puppy dog eyes, and he's like, but I can see it in your eyes, you're not a killer. And Wolfwood's like, how can you stare into my soul? So I think that's going to be interesting. We already have the dynamic set between Wolfwood and Vash, their ideologies, how they're different. And so it's all set up to go downhill from here. The curious thing for me, again, we get a lot of gore, like in this episode, like the worm bleeding to death, the couple getting killed. It's like set up very creepily from the start. What's going to be fascinating to me is going to see Roberto and Wolfwood's dynamic. I've been waiting to see what that's going to be like. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued so far because with Millie was kind of, you know, Vash and Millie both worked together to kind of ground Wolfwood, where Wolfwood was like, Millie helped show him that, like, you know, seeing the errors of his ways and becoming a better person, and Vash did that too on a different level. But I don't picture Roberto dressing as a pregnant woman and pretending to be Wolfwood's partner. I don't see that happening at all. Unfortunately, Meryl might end up doing that. I was like, when Wolfwood was like flirting with Meryl throughout this, I'm like, what is happening? Why is Wolfwood and Meryl flirting? This is the weirdest thing. Like, I've always wanted more of Wolfwood and Meryl's dynamic, but I guess since Millie's not around, we gotta flirt with somebody. So I was just like, what is this? But it's going to be interesting. I was worried going into this episode, or once we figured out that Wolfwood was involved in this episode, I was worried that Roberto's dynamic was going to be too similar to Wolfwood's. But you have Wolfwood as Uncle Downer. He's more of like the old reporter that's, probably got some intel that's eventually going to come out with Wolfwood. And Wolfwood feels much more younger and more spirited in this. He doesn't feel... Wolfwood in the OG series felt more mature to kind of counter Vash a little bit, even though their personalities are similar. Here, Wolfwood seems a little bit more young and like roguish. He seems more Han Solo-ish than he did in the OG series. And I think that's to kind of have a little bit of a difference from Roberto, right? So I'm going to be curious to see where this goes. I'm wondering if Roberto is going to get killed by Wolfwood, if Wolfwood thinks that Roberto knows too much. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. That'll be interesting. But Roberto seems like the type that in this episode he wanted to poke and prod and try to reveal Wolfwood. And then when he realized it wasn't going to get him anywhere, he backed off and was like, well, we'll just play it by ear and see what happens. But yeah, Zazzy the Beast. Oh my gosh. And just the two of them. I love Wolfwood and Vash's interactions. So again, this whole damn plant thing, again, I'm like, are humans eating the angels? Eating the plants, right? Because, Rim described them as angels in the OG series. Are humans eating the Knives and Vash's brethren? If they are, I can see why Knives would be upset about that. Seems that would be a thing. This whole, the plant where they're converting all of the plant eggs into the red versions. What are we doing with that? What are we doing with that? Well, who is this little girl? Why is she there? What's she doing? I don't know. One thing that is very different from the OG series that's kind of intriguing is the idea that Knives is like, well, if my brother is not going to cooperate with us, then we're going to kill him. And I was like, oh, because that was kind of the thing. In the OG series, Knives didn't really seem to want to kill Vash unless it was a last resort. He was doing a lot of the things so it was just him and Vash in the end. And it kind of felt like a toxic relationship. Here, Knives seems like he's just completely ready to use Vash if it means he gets what he wants, or if it means he gets more power or the ability to destroy humanity. Knives is like, yeah, we'll just do that. I also like that he still has on his little larva. He's not ready to burst out of his cocoon yet. He still has his little larva blanket on. He looks so cozy. Some people were saying in the Discord, he looks so cozy and snuggly. Yes, snuggly Knives. But yeah, I think that's interesting that Knives is not opposed, to come out and say that he wants to kill his brother. And I'm like, oh, oof. This is different than the OG. I mean, it's in a not bad way, right? I'm very intrigued by it. I don't like this whole idea of the different bulbs with the plants in them. I'm so curious. And the whole thing about the gates, what is happening? I'm so fascinated by this. And the fact there's all these robots in this factory. Intrigued. Very intrigued. But yeah, I'm going to be curious to see how long, I'm curious to know in this series if it's Wolfwood and Zazzy exclusively working together, or if it's the concept where Wolfwood is working with different gang members of the Gung Ho gang and they all kind of check in on him. So is it just Zazzy that Wolfwood's working with, or are there other Gung Ho gang members going to check in on him to make sure he's doing the job and trying to get Vash, I assume, to go where Knives is to capture him? And how's he going to do that? It seems like everybody's checking in on Wolfwood to make sure he doesn't turn coat. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes down. But yeah, oh my gosh. Love this. Love this episode. Love this episode. Love where the story is going. I like the connections back to the OG series and the way that they're taking it, making it a little bit different. I definitely am pleased. And now that we have Wolfwood involved, I'm like, we only have 12 episodes in this. I'm like, keep him around. Keep him around from episodes 5 on. Let's just do that, shall we? So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Trigun Stampede. Bye!